All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today, we're going to take a close look at ITD Cementation India Ltd. And their financials from Q2 of fiscal year 2025. We've got all the goods, company filings, press release. We even got their investor presentation pulled up. So let's say you're about to walk into a meeting with ITD Cementation, or maybe thinking about investing. By the time we're done with this deep dive, you'll have all the need-to-know info.
You know, what I find really interesting about ITD Cementation is their history. It's a story of resilience, of adapting to the times, starting way back in 1931 as just a branch of a UK company right here in India. Then over the decades, going through all these acquisitions, ultimately becoming part of the Italian Thai Development Public Company Limited.
Yeah, over 90 years in the making.
Yeah.
From a small branch to this global company. Pretty impressive, right?
Yeah.
But there's something else that caught my eye. The parent company, ITD, they were awarded the Royal Seal of Garuda. I gotta admit, I'm curious about this. What does that even mean?
Oh, it's a big deal, actually. Think of it like winning an Oscar, but for businesses, right? It's a mark of distinction awarded by the royal family of Thailand, and it's only given to companies that are truly outstanding. So it tells you right away, ITD Cementation, they're not just any construction firm. They've got that royal backing, that reputation speaks volumes about them in the industry.
Okay, a royal stamp of approval. That definitely adds another layer here. But let's get into the nitty-gritty, the numbers themselves. The press release, it paints a pretty rosy picture. Starting with revenue. For Q2 of fiscal year 25, they hit Rs, 1,991 crore, which is a 24% jump compared to the same time last year. And for the first half of the fiscal year, they hit Rs, 4,372 crore. That's a 27% increase. So we're not just talking growth, we're talking consistent growth.
Exactly. And if you look closer, it's not just growth for the sake of growth. Their profitability, that's impressive too. We're talking profit after tax, PAT for short, for Q2 fiscal year 25, up by 34%. And for the first half of the year, that number jumps to a 63% increase.
Bringing in the money for sure. But what about the profitability itself? How healthy are their margins really?
Well, one of the key things we look at in this industry is EBITDA. Stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And ITD Cementation, they clocked in a 10% EBITDA margin, which is actually quite good for construction. What that tells us is they're not just growing, they're growing profitably. That's what gets investors excited.
All right, let's go a little deeper now. Dig into those detailed financials from the company filings themselves. A couple of things jumped out at me. First, their revenue sources, they're really nicely diversified. 50% from the government, 11% from PSUs, public sector undertakings, and then 39% from the private sector. That's a good mix. And then just looking at the balance sheet, some big numbers there. They've got over Rs, 1,163.93 lakh listed for property, plant, and equipment. That gives you an idea of the scale of their operations.
Yeah, that investment in property, plant, and equipment, that's key. Suggests they're committed to owning their infrastructure, not just leasing it. Could give them a real edge down the line in terms of controlling costs, being flexible with projects. But gotta look beyond the individual numbers to get the full picture right. Like their cash flow statement, that reveals how they're managing their money. Then you've got the debt-to-equity ratio. We'll want to compare that to industry averages, see how they stack up in terms of financial stability.
So it's not just the numbers themselves, it's the story they tell about the company's strategy. Speaking of strategy, let's talk about their order book for a minute. ITD Cementation has a consolidated order book of Rs, 17,986 crore. That's huge. Means they've got a pretty clear path to generating revenue for the next few years.
For sure. A strong order book like that, it provides visibility, a certain level of certainty, a sector that can be pretty up and down sometimes. And what's even better, they're not just sitting on that existing order book. They've secured over 3,850 crore in new orders just in fiscal year 25 so far. Shows they've got momentum.
And if you break down that order book by sector, take a look at their investor presentation. It's even more interesting. You've got everything there. Maritime structures, urban infrastructure, industrial buildings, highways, the whole gamut.
That kind of diversification, it's a great sign. Helps spread the risk, right? Capitalize on different areas within construction, not putting all their eggs in one basket. That's crucial for long-term stability.
Absolutely. And some of these projects, they're just fascinating. Like they're working on the West Container Terminal in Colombo, Sri Lanka. Massive undertaking shows they can handle these complex projects on an international scale, too.
Definitely highlights their technical skills and that global reach, for sure. Not just building structures, it's understanding all the ins and outs of international logistics maritime operations.
It's like they're not just a construction company, they're problem solvers on a global scale.
Yeah.
And you know what else struck me? Their commitment to corporate social responsibility. They're not just going through the motions. They're sponsoring cancer surgeries, setting up digital classrooms in schools, supporting initiatives for people with autism. They're going above and beyond that typical CSR box checking.
I agree. It shows they're genuine about making a social impact, and it aligns with what we're seeing more and more. Investors and consumers looking for companies that share their values, but it's not just about philanthropy either. It's about building a good reputation, strengthening their brand, which in the long run, that contributes to their success as well.
So let's say you're walking into that meeting we talked about earlier, or thinking about that investment.
Yeah.
What are some of the key takeaways here, the things that would give you confidence in ITD cementation?
I'd say their financial performance, it's been consistent. The order book, that's strong, and they're diversified across sectors and geographies. And that commitment to social responsibility, it all adds up to a very positive picture. A company with a long history of success, a clear strategy for growth, and they're committed to ethical practices.
All really good points. But remember earlier, we talked about looking beyond the surface, right? Digging deeper to really assess their financial health. I feel like we need to explore those potential red flags, those nuances that might be hiding between the lines.
You're right, even with a company as seemingly strong as ITD Cementation. It's crucial to understand the risks, the challenges they might face. No investment is completely risk-free, and construction is no exception.
So let's put on our detective hats here, see if we can uncover any potential vulnerabilities. What should we be looking at first?
Well, a good place to start is their debt-to-equity ratio. Tells us how much debt they're using to finance their operations compared to their equity. Right now, it's sitting at 0.42x, which is actually significantly lower than the industry average.
So they're not over-leveraged. That's a good sign. Suggests they're managing their debt responsibly. But what about their ability to generate cash? Can they actually turn those impressive revenues into actual cash flow?
That's where the cash flow statement comes in handy. Gives us a clearer picture of how cash is moving within the company. Now, you might notice there was a net decrease in cash and cash equivalents, but it's important to understand why. A big chunk of that decrease is due to increased investment in property, plant, and equipment. Remember those assets we talked about earlier?
So it's not cash just disappearing. It's being strategically reinvested into assets that will support their future growth. Makes sense.
But even with all these positive signs, there are always potential risks, right? What are some of the challenges that ITD cementation might face moving forward?
Of course. One challenge could be their reliance on government contracts. It's a strength right now.
Well,
But if there are any big policy changes or budget cuts in infrastructure, that could directly impact their revenue stream. That's a really good point. Shows how important diversification is. Even when you've got a seemingly secure source of revenue. Anything else we should be thinking about?
well, the construction industry in India, it's incredibly competitive. Lots of players vying for those big projects. ITD cementation needs to constantly innovate, stay ahead of the curve technologically, and offer competitive pricing if they want to keep that edge.
So they can't afford to rest on their laurels.
Yeah.
They keep pushing forward, adapting to new tech, market trends, constantly looking for ways to improve their efficiency, their value proposition.
Exactly. They've done well so far, but the construction landscape, it's always changing. It's like navigating a ship through constantly shifting waters. You need a skilled captain, a strong vessel, and you got to be aware of what's on the horizon.
Great analogy. So it sounds like the takeaway here is ITD cementation, they're in a strong position. But continued success, that's not a guarantee. They need to be proactive, manage risks, adapt to change, and stay ahead of the competition. What else can you tell us about their long-term prospects?
Well, they've shown they understand their market really well. Remember that breakdown of their order book? The fact that they're involved in projects across all these different sectors, maritime, urban infrastructure, industrial buildings, highways, it suggests they're not just reacting to trends, they're anticipating them.
So they're thinking ahead, strategically positioning themselves to capitalize on emerging opportunities. Definitely a sign of a company with a forward-thinking mindset. But how do they make sure they keep winning those big projects, especially in such a competitive market?
One thing that could give them a real leg up is their commitment to quality and safety. They have those ISO certifications for quality, environment, and safety. Those are highly valued by clients, especially for those large-scale infrastructure projects. These certifications, they not only show that they adhere to international standards, but also their commitment to minimizing their impact on the environment and ensuring worker safety.
Yeah, those certifications are like a stamp of approval, reassuring clients that they're working with a company that prioritizes quality and ethical practices.
Yeah. Exactly. And in an industry where reputation is everything, those factors can be a real differentiator when they're bidding for projects. It tells potential clients that they're not just investing in a construction project, they're investing in a company that values excellence and sustainability.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've looked at their financials, their order book, their diversification strategy, their commitment to social responsibility, the potential risks and challenges they face. It's clear ITD Cementation is a company worth keeping an eye on. But what's the final verdict? Would you say they're a good investment?
Well, that's a question that ultimately depends on your individual investment goals and your risk tolerance. What we've done here is give you the information and insights you need to make an informed decision.
Right. We've given you the tools, but the final call, that's yours. But even if you're not thinking about investing, what are some of the bigger lessons we can learn from ITD Cementation's story?
I think one of the key takeaways is the importance of adaptability and resilience,
Mhm.
especially in a business world that's constantly changing. They started as a small branch of a foreign company and evolved into a global player over 9 decades, navigating various economic cycles and industry shifts along the way.
So they've proven they can weather the storms and come out stronger. What else?
Their focus on diversification, that's another valuable lesson. They're not betting on just one sector or one type of project. They're spreading their risk, taking advantage of opportunities across the board in the entire construction industry, both domestically and internationally.
Makes a lot of sense. Like the old saying goes, don't put all your eggs in one basket. It seems like they've really mastered that art of balancing risk and opportunity. But before we wrap up, I want to touch on one more thing that stood out to me. Their long-term vision. They're not just focused on the next quarter or the next year. They're thinking about where they want to be in 5, 10, even 20 years.
Absolutely. And you can see that long-term vision in their investments. Think back to that big number for property, plant, and equipment. That's not just about meeting current demand. It's about laying the foundation for future growth and expansion.
So they're playing the long game,
Yeah.
investing in their own capabilities to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. And that kind of thinking, it's essential in an industry as dynamic and competitive as construction.
So I think we've covered just about everything. Explored their financials, order book, diversification strategy, commitment to social responsibility, their potential risks, and their long-term vision. It's been a really fascinating deep dive into ITD Cementation India Ltd.
It really has. And I think anyone listening to this now has a much better understanding of this company, its strengths, its challenges, and its potential.
And remember, this is just a starting point. If you're intrigued by what you've heard, dig a little deeper, check out their full investor presentation on their website. There's always more to discover.
Absolutely. And always keep in mind, when it comes to investing, knowledge is power. The more you know, the better decisions you can make.
So until our next deep dive, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those insightful questions. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no doubt about that. It's not just about putting up buildings. It's about understanding the whole picture, global logistics, how things work at ports, the whole 9 yards.
Right, like they're solving problems, but on a global scale.
Mm.
And speaking of problem solving, I was really impressed by their commitment to corporate social responsibility. They're not messing around. They're sponsoring cancer surgeries, setting up those digital classrooms in schools, supporting initiatives for people with autism. It's like they're really taking it seriously, going beyond the bare minimum.
Absolutely. It shows they actually care about making a difference. And it's smart, too. It's what people are looking for these days. Investors, consumers, everyone wants to support companies that align with their values. But it's not just about being charitable either. It's a long-term strategy, building a good reputation, strengthening their brand, and that ultimately translates into success down the road.
Okay, so picture this. You're walking into that meeting we talked about, or maybe you're seriously considering an investment. What are the key takeaways here? What would give you that confidence in ITD Cementation?
Well, their track record speaks for itself. Their financial performance has been consistently strong. Their order book is packed, and they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. They're spread out across different sectors, different parts of the world. And that commitment to social responsibility, it all paints a very positive picture. You're looking at a company with a long history of success. They've got a clear plan for growth, and they're doing it the right way, ethically.
Yeah, those are all great points. But remember earlier, we talked about not just scratching the surface, right? We need to dig deeper, really get a sense of their financial health. What about those potential red flags, those little things that might be lurking beneath the surface?
You're absolutely right. Even with a company that seems as solid as ITD Cementation, it's crucial to understand the risks, what challenges they might face down the road. No investment is completely risk-free, and the construction industry is no different.
All right, let's put our detective hats on, see if we can uncover any potential vulnerabilities. Where should we start?
Well, the debt-to-equity ratio, that's always a good indicator. It tells you how much debt they're using to finance their operations compared to their equity. Right now, theirs is sitting at 0.42x, which is actually quite a bit lower than the average for the industry.
So they're not over-leveraged. That's a good sign. Shows they're being responsible with their debt. But what about their ability to actually generate cash? Can they turn those impressive revenues into cold, hard cash?
That's where the cash flow statement comes in. It gives you a more detailed look at how cash is moving within the company. Now, you might see that there was a net decrease in cash and cash equivalents. But it's important to understand why that happened. A big chunk of that decrease is because they've been investing more in property, plant, and equipment. Remember those assets we were talking about?
Right, so it's not like the cash just vanished. It's being strategically reinvested into assets that will fuel their growth in the future.
Hmm.
That makes sense. But even with all these positive signs, there's got to be some potential risks, right? What are some of the challenges that ITD cementation might bump into down the road?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is their reliance on government contracts. It's a strength for them now, but what if there are major policy changes? Or maybe budget cuts in the infrastructure sector? That could have a big impact on their revenue stream.
That's a really good point. Shows how important it is to be diversified, even when you've got a seemingly stable source of income. What else should we be considering?
Well, the construction industry in India, it's a tough business. It's incredibly competitive with tons of companies fighting for those big projects. ITD Cementation needs to stay on top of their game, keep innovating, stay ahead of the curve with technology, and make sure their pricing is competitive if they want to maintain their edge.
So they can't afford to get complacent. They've got to keep pushing forward, adapting to the latest tech, the changing market trends, always looking for ways to be more efficient, offer a better value proposition.
Exactly. They've done a fantastic job so far, but the construction landscape is constantly evolving. Think of it like navigating a ship through ever-changing waters. You need a skilled captain at the helm, a strong vessel, and you've always got to be scanning the horizon.
Great analogy. So the key takeaway here is that while ITD Cementation is in a strong position right now, continued success isn't a given. They need to be proactive, manage risks effectively, adapt to change, and stay ahead of the competition. What else can you tell us about their long-term prospects?
Well, one thing that stands out is their deep understanding of the market. Remember when we looked at the breakdown of their order book? The fact that they're involved in projects across so many different sectors, maritime, urban infrastructure, industrial buildings, highways, it tells me they're not just reacting to trends, they're anticipating them.
So they're thinking ahead, positioning themselves strategically to capitalize on emerging opportunities. That's a clear sign of a forward-thinking company.
Mhm.
But how do they ensure they keep winning those big contracts, especially in such a fiercely competitive market?
One of their biggest advantages is their unwavering commitment to quality and safety. They've got those ISO certifications for quality, environment, and safety. Those are incredibly valuable, especially for clients who are looking for large-scale infrastructure projects. Those certifications not only demonstrate their commitment to meeting international standards, but they also show that they're dedicated to minimizing their environmental impact and prioritizing the safety of their workers.
Yeah, those certifications are like a gold seal of approval, giving clients that extra reassurance that they're partnering with a company that values quality and does things the right way.
Exactly. And in an industry where reputation is everything, those factors can be a real game changer when they're bidding for projects. It tells potential clients that they're not just investing in a construction project, they're investing in a company that's committed to excellence and sustainability.
Okay, we've covered a ton of ground here. We've looked at their financials, their order book, how they're diversified, their commitment to social responsibility. We've talked about the potential risks they face and their long-term vision. It's been a fascinating deep dive into ITD Cementation India Ltd. But the big question is, are they a good investment?
Ultimately, that's a decision that you need to make based on your own investment goals and your risk tolerance. What we've done here is equip you with the knowledge and insights to make an informed choice.
Exactly. We've given you the tools, but the final call is yours. But even if you're not thinking about investing right now, there are some valuable lessons we can all learn from ITD Cementation's story.
I completely agree. One of the biggest takeaways is the importance of being adaptable and resilient, especially in today's business world where things are constantly changing. They started as a small offshoot of a foreign company, and over 9 decades, they've transformed into a global powerhouse, navigating all sorts of economic ups and downs and shifts in the industry along the way.
Yeah, they've proven they can weather any storm and come out stronger on the other side. What else stands out to you?
Their commitment to diversification, that's a key lesson. They're not betting everything on one horse, they're spreading their risk, taking advantage of opportunities across the entire construction industry, both here in India and around the world.
Makes perfect sense. It's like that old saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And it seems like they've really mastered that art of balancing risk and opportunity. But before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to something that really impressed me. Their long-term vision. They're not just thinking about the next quarter or the next year. They're looking ahead 5, 10, even 20 years down the line.
Yeah, that long-term thinking, it's crucial in any industry, but especially in construction where things are always evolving. It's so dynamic.
Right? They're not just reacting, they're planning ahead, making those strategic moves.
Exactly, and you can see that in their investments. Remember that big number we saw for property, plant, and equipment?
Yeah, that was a huge number.
That's not just about keeping up with current demand. It's about building a solid foundation for future growth, for expansion down the line.
So they're playing the long game, investing in their own capabilities, making sure they can stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. That kind of foresight, it's essential in an industry as competitive as construction.
Well, I think we've pretty much covered it all, haven't we? We've looked at their financials, their order book, their diversification strategy, their commitment to social responsibility, the potential risks, and their long-term vision. It's been a pretty deep dive into ITD Cementation India Ltd.
It really has. It's been fascinating. I think anyone listening to this now has a much better grasp of what this company's all about, their strengths, the challenges they face, and their potential.
Yeah, and remember, this is just a starting point. If you found this interesting, if you're curious to learn more, go check out their website. They've got their full investor presentation there. Always more to uncover, right?
Absolutely. And when it comes to investing, knowledge is your best friend. The more you know, the better equipped you are to make those smart decisions.
Well said. So until our next deep dive, keep exploring, keep learning, and most importantly, keep asking those insightful questions. Thanks for joining us.